What was that? Canceled.
Exactly, canceled. This is hashtag Go Right with Peter Boykin. And we're talking about from Charlie Kirk's assassination to censoring you is the blueprint to end freedom. You can follow about this on gorightnews.com and more information. So the story begins with a single image. A viral oversight committee post on X, formerly Twitter, showed flashing red sirens, the logos of Discord, Steam, Twitch, and Reddit, and the faces of tech leaders suddenly cast as villains. The message: Congress is calling for them to explain how radicals exploited their platforms in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, at first glance, it looks like accountability, but the deeper story is darker. This is not simply about Charlie Kirk. His murder is being used as a lever, a sacrifice, to accelerate the long-running scheme to chip away at our First Amendment. Bad enough they were messing with our Second Amendment. Now they're messing with the First Amendment. And eventually to set the stage for an attack on our Second, which is what they're doing. The vessel is the voice, folks. The First Amendment was written to prevent government from silencing citizens. For over 2 centuries, it worked. But the loophole has finally been exploited. Government doesn't have to pass laws to censor you. It just pressures corporations. If you control the vessel, the platforms people use to speak, you can control the voice. The modern public square is not the town hall, it's the algorithm. Whoever manipulates it decides who gets heard and who gets silent. And a lot of people use that against me. They're like, nobody listens to your videos. There's no big views. Yeah, well, I'm not paying to boost it. And a lot of times it gets squished and squandered. I know a long time ago, before they started messing with me, I had over half a million followers on Twitter, talking to celebrities and everything. Did kicked. Knew I was running for office. They assassinated my digital online presence. Probably a little bit better than being assassinated in person. Now, it took 250 years, but they found a way to punch through the First Amendment without ever touching the Constitution by intimidating or regulating private companies. They created censorship by proxy. And once the voice is controlled, every other right becomes easier to attack, especially the right to bear arms. Let's start with COVID and the silencing of dissent. The blueprint for the scheme was tested during COVID. Citizens were told to shut up, stay home, trust the silence, and stop questioning authority. Moved on to Facebook and the Biden administration. Mark Zuckerberg admitted that the White House pressured Meta to remove posts about COVID-19. Satire, dissent, and even legitimate scientific debate were scrubbed. The government couldn't legally silence you, so they leaned on platforms to do it instead. Remember, this is the same platform. I don't agree with them, but they wiped out everybody that talked about QAnon, everything that's QAnon. They wiped out everything about the Proud Boy. But yet, spammers, fake profiles, pornography and stuff, still there, didn't do anything about it. And that's when then science became the narrative. The lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, and the mask debates were declared untouchable. To question them was labeled, quote, as misinformation. Some people called misinformation as hate speech. Countless accounts were suspended or deplatformed, including politicians who raised concerns about liberty, elections, and medical freedom. We did rallies about it, and I risked getting canceled multiple times. But you canceled me once. How many times you're going to cancel me? The mechanism is control. The phrase unfounded became the hammer. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was silencing. Citizens learned that if you broke the narrative, you lost your platform. COVID was never just a pandemic, it was a test run for censorship at a scale, and it worked. Then moved to 2020 election and the great censoring. The 2020 election became the next battlefield, including the Hunter Biden laptop. When the New York Post broke the story, Facebook and Twitter throttled it. The excuse, quote, hack and leak warning from federal agencies. Later, much of that was proven wrong, and the suppression, however, worked. One of the most consequential stories of the election was buried, which led to election dissent. Posts questioning mail-in ballots, voting irregularities, or election audits were labeled as misinformation. Some were deleted outright. Citizens weren't convinced by debate. They were silenced by corporate decrees. I ran for office at the time. I lost a channel on YouTube because they wouldn't let me talk about election integrity, which is a huge thing when it comes to politics. There were government meetings. Records show that platforms were in regular meetings with agencies about election content. Guidance quickly turned into censorship demands. And this was no accident. It was a state or outsourcing censorship, laundering it through Silicon Valley to skirt the First Amendment. And the only reason I think we kind of broke that mold is because Elon Musk spent money to buy X. And then Zuckerberg kind of realized what was going on and he calmed down. But they're going after other platforms. And that's the slippery slope of hate speech, folks. The most dangerous trick in the book is redefining speech as hate. When Republicans are in power, the promise is to silence Antifa and radical leftists. When the Democrats take over, MAGA becomes domestic terrorism, just as President Biden himself, who labeled Trump supporters as extremists, even terrorists. Once that line is crossed, dissent is criminalized. During COVID, skepticism was treated as hate. During 2020, questioning elections was treated as hate. Today, criticizing government policy risks deplatforming. If we talk about, I'm the leader of Gays for Trump, but if we talk about trans people and other things that have to do with the LGBT, you talk about, things that have to do with blacks, like the individual that killed that white girl in Charlotte, the mental. Things like that could be labeled as hate. We can't talk about the Jews. We can't talk about the Muslims. We can't talk about anything because everything's going to be called hate. Tomorrow, hate speech may simply mean voting the wrong way. Whoever controls the definition of hate controls the country. So here's some potential issues in the free speech debate. America as the gatekeeper of liberty. For more than 2 centuries, the world has looked toward the United States as the model of free expression. The First Amendment isn't just an American invention. It's a global standard. And when America chips away at free speech, the ripple effects are felt everywhere. If we allow loopholes and corporate censorship to redefine speech here, other nations will follow. And thus becomes the weaponization of hate speech. Hate speech sounds like a noble cause, but it's a political weapon. The term itself is subjective. One administration uses it to silence Antifa. Another one uses it to silence MAGA. The danger is that whoever defines it wins. The power to decide what Americans are allowed to say. That's not law. It's controlled by vocabulary. And like they said, the winners are who writes history. So what is actually illegal? Free speech protections are not unlimited. The law already draws lines. Direct threats, incitement to violence, criminal conspiracies, and radicalization into violent groups are not protected. Now, those are crimes, and they should be handled by law enforcement. By equating unpopular opinions or controversial political speech with crime is a shortcut to tyranny. So here's the global stakes. When Americans accept censorship, the rest of the world, or the rest of the free world, loses its anchor. If the gatekeepers of liberty become gatekeepers of narratives, then the torch of free expression becomes dark. America's enemies watch and smile as we dismantle ourselves from within. Which leads to a sacrifice to close the public square. Some believe Charlie Kirk's assassination was more than a personal tragedy. It was a sacrificial act, used as a pretext to launch a full-scale war on free speech. Whether or not coordination is ever proven, the pattern is undeniable. Take a horrific event, amplify it, and then use it as justification to close the gates of the public square. That's how liberty is dismantled, not overnight, but brick by brick, app by app. Again, let's talk about Charlie Kirk, the sacrifice and the pretext. Charlie Kirk's death shocks, grieves, angers, and that's exactly the opportunity those needing for speech control need. This theory holds that his assassination is being used as a sacrificial accident or incident. The narrative Radical Voices calls this. Platforms failed to stop radicalization. If the public is riled up enough, regulations follow. Platform restrictions follow. Hidden censorship becomes acceptable. Whether or not the sacrifice was planned, someone is benefiting. The public square shrinks. Privacy erodes. Control shifts away from people and toward corporations and government. And I question this. If you make it harder and harder and harder to find those really bad people, they start getting in darker and darker and darker corners. And that puts our safety at risk. So rather than expose themselves up in public, keeping an eye on them and taking them down when needed, then to shut down the whole system. Now, what the CEOs really should answer for, if Congress truly wants accountability, they should stop pretending CEOs are speech police and start asking the real question. Who buys and sells user data? How are algorithms amplifying outrage while silencing dissent? Why does spam thrive while political speech disappears? What backroom deals exist between the government and tech companies to coordinate censorship? Just ask Discord. What contracts tie these platforms to intelligence agencies? And why are encrypted apps like Telegram smeared when their only crime is protecting privacy? These are the questions that expose power. Everything else is just theater. And this is why they fear encryption. Platforms like Telegram terrify the government because they can't be spied on. End-to-end encryption means conversations are private. Not even the servers can read them, they say. That is exactly why bureaucrats hate. They hate it. They say that extremists hide there. In truth, encryption protects dissidents, journalists, and ordinary citizens. Privacy is not the enemy of freedom, it is its shield. And if encryption falls, liberty follows. And that's it, folks. If you want to get the rest, you have to check out the other podcast where I talk about the description. I talk about Charlie Kirk and the blueprint of tyranny. If you want to check us out, you can check us out on all the platforms while I'm still there. On GoRightNews.com. We're on Spreaker. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. We're on YouTube, one of the YouTubes. We're on Rumble, really great platform. Truth Social, Rumble. It's rumble.com/GoRightNews. Check us out. Please share this. And speak out, folks. Speak out while we still have a voice. Do not think that if you give the government just a little bit more power, just a little bit more power, just a little bit more safe, it's going to be 1984.